So welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a chance to have a cup of coffee and network, talk to people. Now you are going to experience something that I can guarantee that you have never been to before. So when we are getting captions in a little bit of a strange order here, but I think now it's live, so if I just continue, do blah, blah, blah for a while, then the captions will be absolutely perfect in a while. So we have moved from testing really techie things to the actual how do you make this happen in an organization, also very practical hands-on tips from a large organization. And now we will go back to the user perspective, but now kind of coming at the user perspective from another perspective or another angle. So really the disability inclusion way and identity, and kind of in combination with something as interesting as poetry. And for those of you who were here or are here in Espoo, I'm saying Helsinki all the time, but okay, it's close to Helsinki, so it's Espoo. We have had a Runeberg-tårta, which is, of course, as you all know, one day too early, so it shouldn't be eaten until tomorrow. I'm sorry for that, but it was so close, so we couldn't help ourselves trying. That's one of the poets in the Finnish history or culture tradition. I think his wife invented this cake, so we're all eating it now on the 5th and also today on the 4th of February. So very good connection into the next session, because now we are going to talk about how collective poetry writing can make us understand and kind of detect new things when it comes to disability and inclusion. And I have invited Olivia Dahl, who is a sociological researcher, I can't say that, I'm sorry, from the University of Copenhagen. And the reason I invited her here is that I heard her speak in Norway a while ago, and I thought, wow, I've been doing this for I don't know how many years. I'm like a dinosaur in this environment, but here comes somebody that has so much to say and comes with it from an angle that I haven't really seen before. So making me surprised by delivering something that we all kind of know, but from a different perspective. I think that's so rewarding. So now you know that you are going to like this topic. So if somebody doesn't like the session, then you're wrong. This is good. So with that introduction, no pressure, I would like to invite to the stage Olivia Dahl to take us away, please.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, that puts a bit of pressure on me, because now I have to deliver something that you really like. Today I'm going to talk about my PhD project that I actually just handed in on Friday. So now I'm just waiting. Yeah. And I did my PhD in sociology about the everyday lives of people with disabilities, more specifically people living with cerebral palsy, and how they experience navigating everyday life. And these are some of the pictures I also included in my thesis, because I just wanted to put 2 lines under that this PhD project is about real people and real experiences of navigating society. And I just wanted also to show how different these people are and how different they come into society, but still how many of the same barriers they do encounter. And as a part of my PhD project, I didn't only want to do interviews and focus groups and stuff like that. Actually, I started with doing that, and I always found myself like sitting in front of people and trying to like, tell me about your life. Please let us put you up on this traditional medical table, and then I'll examine you just from a sociological point of view. And myself also being a person that grew up in like the disability community with cerebral palsy, I always hated contributing to science where that person sat with their big glasses on and just wanted to like get some information from my body. So I wanted to establish some other ways of knowledge about living with disability that is not only like through objectification of the disabled experience, but also leave the field a little bit stronger than when I came in to like disrupt everyone's experiences of navigating social life. So I called my PhD thesis the hunt, or jagten på det gode liv, the hunt for a good life, or striving for a good life. And it's about how people with cerebral palsy navigate different understandings of disability, both how disability is problematized, a medical model of disability, where we think disability is equal to the person's deficit or the person, and that's why the person has difficulties moving around in society, but how they also draw upon social model understandings of disability and say, no, it's not only me that is disabled, we are disabled by society. And then also more like crib theoretical understandings of disability, where they also say, okay, no, my disability is not just a problem of medical research. It's not my individual bodily problem. It's not only just a suicidal problem either. It's actually also a part of me and a part of my identity, and taking that on in different ways. So I don't know if anyone of you know crib theory, but that definitely is a theory that can open up for like more positive identity understandings of disability.
May I just move you to that part, because you're disturbing the captions a little bit.
Of course.
Sorry.
So just to give a little bit introduction to myself, I don't know if all of you also have that feeling, but for a long time, especially in my own context, disability has been a little bit kind of like an unsexy topic. People often use that word, which I think is a little bit weird, but so it's always about like, fixing disability, and maybe also something that we often think of like a medical area or a medical field or a very technical field, like building some ramps and stuff like that, and making people that are a little bit difficult to include, try to include them anyway. But through these last 3 years of writing my PhD, I have actually experienced, together with other young people with cerebral palsy and disability more generally, to be invited up on more mainstream scenes talking about disability in a more intersectional perspectives, like how disability interacts with other things such as gender or age or so I've been around also trying to put disability talk about disability in new ways, which is also reflected in the way I try to develop methods. And then you also do see the little picture of me, little Olivia, sitting there with just after surgeries. So many of us with cerebral palsy have undergone a lot of surgeries throughout our lives to like try to make our presence and our participation even more possible through like fixing and optimizing the disabled body. And together with other people with cerebral palsy, I think we wanted to create rooms where we could talk about disability in other ways. So this is just a little bit about my PhD project, but I also just wanted to first say that together with this guy, Kasper Erik, I don't know if any one of you know him if you're from Denmark, but he's also, he's a person that lives with cerebral palsy and is also a poet, and has written this very amazing book, New Balances, which is a book about living and navigating social life with cerebral palsy. And together with him, we developed what we called the School for Crib Poetry. So instead of, together with him, I collaborated on trying to engage with disability in other ways. So when you just presented me, I thought, oh no, maybe they think that I'm a poet and I'm not a poet. And I didn't really I don't have anything with poetry that's like, we have to do poetry with everything. And it could as well for me just also have been like something else, some performance, or I don't have like that creative thing that I just want to put into everything. I'm more like a sociologist who thought, okay, I can collaborate with this other person who has some of the same ambitions of me of creating other rooms for talking about disability. And I see that there is some methodological potential in this. So what we did was we invited a lot of people living with CP. You could have done this with a lot of other persons, with a lot of other types of disabilities, into 2 different rooms. We sat around a big table and wrote collectively about living with disability. So a lot of narratives on disability, I don't know if you recognize that, that's often like individualized narratives, like what's wrong with you, or what's your disability and what's your diagnosis. And we're very focused on like the individual narrative of disability. And when we only search for disability narratives individually, then we lose a little bit sense of the structural and the political aspects of disability and the collective aspects of what's actually disabling all of us, depending on the barriers. So when Kasper Erik told me about this idea of writing together, I was like, yes, that's a good idea. That's a way of doing this that could be interesting. So then I, of course, dived into all the ideas of doing poetry together. And I will not go into this very much because I know I've heard from you that that's not at all accessible, that I included so much text in my PowerPoint. And I'm from a whole other field. So I will very much say I'm sorry for that. But I did highlight some of the words that you can take a look at. So what the literature says, that poetry, disability poetry, can help foster positive group communities, center disabled perspectives, be a therapeutic tool, challenge dominant disability narratives, subvert normative ideas of disability, empower, world making, all these buzzwords. And I was like reading all this literature, and all of it again was about people individually writing about living with disability on their own. And I thought that my contribution here could be creating these spaces and a community for engaging with disability together. And what would that do both to what we would write about, but also how we would talk about it? So what we did was we sat around this table where we wrote together, and some of the people had assistants with them. So in Denmark, we have personal assistant teams if you need that. A lot of people do struggle with actually gaining access to that, even though they need it a lot. But some of the people who participated did. And I don't know if you know it, but you can have cerebral palsy in many ways. So, like I stand and walk around like many of you probably do. But cerebral palsy can come to terms in many, many different ways. So you can also, it's like called a brain damage from when you're very little, from your either within the tummy of your mother or just around birth. So it's a little bit like if any one of you went out and got a brain damage, but because your brain is like developed, then it wouldn't like be quite the same. That's like the medical definitions that I'm not going even more into. But so people that participated in this project were very different. Some people used crutches, some people used walkers, some people used wheelchairs and electric wheelchairs, and some people had the need for help in every aspect of their lives, and some people just needed some help or support sometimes. And then we wrote together. And we wrote from these different prompts. I remember, my body is, and I dream of. So I don't know if you can imagine, we had a piece of paper like here, where I wrote in the beginning, I dream of. And then the idea was that people could write a sentence and then send it off, and then write a new sentence and send it off, so that like ideas could emerge from within the collective. So the idea was not to isolate the individual, but instead try to like, okay, what do we actually, to try to like create something together. So what I'm just going to walk you through is 3 things that I found out. I found out that people in the act of writing established some kind of shared history, and they also bonded with each other. So I also taped all the conversations in between. How did you feel about writing? How is it to be in this room? How is it to engage with each other? And then when we also throughout the process, Kasper Erik was like a real poet, and he reads out loud things in a kind of like a poetic way and stuff like that. So I don't know if you can imagine that the room like became silent and people were like listening to each other's memories and like connecting them all together. And then we did it again and talked about it and did it again. Yes, so now I've introduced you to some of my thoughts about it and my ways of going about it, and also the ideas of creating another room for talking about and discussing disability that is outside medical framework and within a more like creative and also a little bit more critical framework of engaging with disability, and also a collective setting. So I want to first read out aloud a little part of the poetry that was written, and it connects to the establishment of a shared history, which is also often very much about the experience of being different from the expectations of being able-bodied. Yes. I remember they thought I could learn to eat with a spoon. I remember they thought I could learn anything. I remember always having eyes on my back, watching how I walked. I remember my mother getting angry when I didn't speak clearly. I remember trying to fit in. I remember being a burden. So this was like and also the people in the room talked about, it's a little bit daunting that we write a lot about a little bit negative aspects of what we remember, but and it all often have to do with like living with disability and navigating in a world where people understand disability through the lens of otherness or difference. And people kept writing also about their experiences with medical interventions. I remember being asked to take off my clothes so the doctor could examine me. I remember the dark, cold mornings when I was sent alone in a taxi to occupational therapy. I remember what it feels like to be observed by doctors. I remember when he wanted to cut my legs. I remember how anesthesia smells like. I remember dreaming of another body. So this is also just to give you an impression of what the memories are of some of these people living with CP. And I guess that a lot of people remember different things that have been a little bit difficult in their childhood. And people in this writing session also talked about, well, we have a lot of the same memories, and it's not because we all have experienced exactly the same, but they kind of like intertwine, and we have experienced some of the same thoughts about being different, and people wanted to kind of fix you. So one, for example, said about growing up with cerebral palsy that it was often like something that you wanted to hide or something that you wanted to fix or optimize. He said, I've thought a lot about it when I was in primary school and high school, and it wasn't until the end of high school that I acknowledged that I could remember my diagnosis, which was CP. When people approached me in primary school and at the beginning of high school, I always said that I couldn't remember it because, well, only to avoid making it concrete or an attempt to push it away, because if I couldn't remember the diagnosis, then it wasn't there. But that didn't work because it was still there all the time. So this is a part of like how the people in this room connected with each other, sharing the history of always kind of like wanting to conceal the disability or trying to like put it a little bit away and being ashamed of it. And also both parents, but also therapeutic interventions where they had this feeling that cerebral palsy was only in the world to be trying to like take it out of this world-ish. I remember the stares. I remember you looking at me strangely. I remember I don't think of you as disabled. I remember there's nothing wrong with your head. I remember all the times I've been compared to Stephen Hawking. I remember the offer of activation in protected institutions. I remember I was afraid to be me. So people also talked about the experience of encountering barriers of society, and also in this room, they started also talking a little bit about, well, maybe it's not only like our bodies that are wrong, maybe there are also some of the stares, why are they staring at us all the time? And also there came up some kind of like also a little bit of an energy in the room from writing together. So one participant said, I think it's interesting how there are so many different people in this room, and yet there's so many sentences that are to each other, and many situations that I can relate to it, and others probably can relate to it as well. And I just think that it's pretty wild, that feeling and experience. And another participant said, yeah, and we hardly even know each other. So also that like kind of experience in that room, like, oh, wait a minute, it's not only me who had that experience, you also had that experience, and you had it. Okay, well, then there might be something a little bit more structural to it, or something a little bit more political to it. And I think we do need to remember that these people are, they're young people with cerebral palsy in a Danish context where they often live isolated from each other, not necessarily going to the same schools or necessarily knowing that many people with disabilities. So this experience of engaging in a community, it just was also an experience of getting the sense of like, okay, disability being more than just a personal deficit, being something that is also political. And they said, incredible. I think it's been good to be a part of this writing group. I think that it had an incredibly hard time, putting my disability into word. So also, I don't know if there's a little bit of a disconnect here in my mic. Is it annoying for anyone? It's okay. So that whole thing about putting my disability into words, gaining like a vocabulary for talking about disability in other terms that brain than defect or something that you should conceal or something that should be fixed. And then they also gained a little bit of 10 minutes. A little bit of confidence in that room and try to like write about disability in other ways, which I will read out loud. I dream of being a transformer. I dream of making a difference for another person. I dream of messing with the world's understanding of disability. I dream of disability becoming something normal to have, like having hair, a beating heart, and a big nose. I dream of one day inventing a sport where the one who's the best at not being able to do things wins. I dream of creating understanding between people. My body is a disturbance. My body is different but unique. My body is strong. My body is fucking gorgeous. You just haven't realized it yet. My body is uncontrollable. My body is just a body. My body is an invitation to vulnerability. My body is boundless. My body is a battleground. My body is the root of my reflection. My body is political. My body is unpredictable. My body is provocative. My body is wild. So I felt like throughout this 3 hours of engagement together, people started, I don't know if you remember the first lines about, I remember being fixed. I remember I was afraid to be me. Within that framework of time, people also just started to write about disability in a whole other way. For example, that my body is a battleground. My body is something that, is political, is something that is unpredictable, but not in a sense that we have to fix it, but just in a sense that it disrupts the ways we often think about normal and not normal and wrong and right. My body is different but unique, also just trying to reclaim a little bit those stereotypes or ideas we have about a body. And then I also think those things of like also trying to change the very underlying framework of what we think is normal and not normal. For example, I dream of one day inventing a sport where the one who's the best at not being able to do things wins. Trying like to also disrupt a bit like that whole idea we have of who's the best and who can be included and stuff like that. I think maybe I'll stop now and then we'll have a little bit of time for questions. If you want to ask, you're very, very welcome. And thanks a lot for listening. I hope that this perspective can be useful for some of you, not necessarily to put directly into legislation or into technology, but as a way of also maybe thinking critical about who are these people? Are they necessarily different, radically different from non-disabled people, or do we all maybe find ourselves on a spectrum of being a human body and a human brain that differs in many, many ways that we have to work around, and how can we, from our very different positions, work towards everyone being able to navigate social and society and the social life of our societies. So thanks a lot for inviting me.
Thank you, Olivia. That was a lot of text in a short time. So but I'm happy that we have recorded this so people can go back and read the poetry again a little bit, maybe a little slower, so that it kind of sinks in. We have a couple of questions. So what do you think is needed from society to not repeat the mistakes that was done in history or historic times?
Yeah, so I think I started also out with telling a little bit about my PhD, which is about how we understand disability through these different disability models. Do we understand it as a personal deficit or as a social structure that is oppressing specific types of people, or do we understand disability as actually a very normal human trait that all of us might encounter, and therefore we have to support people with disabilities very fundamentally in their own right? So I would say that working a little bit with our own paradigm and our own frameworks of understanding disability in its very essence, I think from a sociological point of view, that's very important. So when you sit there and make legislation and make these very specific turns in the ways of doing it, it depends a lot of how you actually think of this humankind or human way of being in the world. And acknowledging that disability is a very normal aspect of being a human, I would say that could be a little bit more transforming to our way also of designing and making interventions and stuff like that. Yeah.
Okay, do we have a question in the room? Yes, we have hands. Do we have a microphone runner somewhere? Uh-huh. They were so absorbed with the session, so they forgot what they were going to do. Yes, I think we have one here.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. This is Rosa. One thing I want to say that there are two Paralympic sports that there is no counterpart in the Olympics, and one is for the cerebral palsy, people with cerebral palsy. They play bocce, and it is a great game. If you didn't see it yet, please go to YouTube. It is brilliant to see it. So this is something that other people cannot do. And the other one is goalball for the visually impaired. So I'm happy that it also came out and gave me the opportunity to mention this. My question is very much related to the previous one, actually. I was just wondering, like you talked about the disability models, and we know like there are 4 or 5 terms, five categories of them. But when you are working out of this study with the outcomes, did you notice or did you observe if there is kind of another way of defining the disability coming from the people with disabilities, actually, like around this discussion with the outcomes from your research? Did you observe like okay, this is for the social model, this can fit in the charity model or something, but then like there is this thing coming from the actual people, like they describe different way. I don't know if my
I think it is clear. I would say one of the things I think I found throughout the project was that often there's these battles between the models, like which model gets the best impression of what disability is, which is most precise. And what I think I found was that these people draw upon the different models. They're all internalized in one person, right? So at one time you would conceal your disability, and another time you would scream it. I also wrote this article, Screaming and Concealing Disability, where they draw upon different models of disability. So I didn't necessarily find like, oh, people with cerebral palsy have this whole new way of describing disability that is fully unique from, and no non-disabled people would never ever come up with that. So that was not my impression. It was more my impression that they navigated between very opposing disability models through their strategies, and that work in itself, navigating these very different paradigms of disability understandings, is what put together their disability identity, which is a very socially and emotionally draining process of constantly navigating between concealing, screaming, politicizing, trying to accept, trying to counteract and stuff like that. That was what I found, I think, and also wrote some articles about that whole process of navigating, not necessarily choosing one model, but navigating with all of them. Yeah, without necessarily being able to put them into theoretical models, right? It was more like, now I'm trying to accept my disability. Now I want disability to be an integrated part of society. Now I want to cure disability. Now I want a cure. And now I want society to accommodate me. So drawing upon these actually very different models. And that's also what my PhD project is about, trying to put some light on that we have these different models, because in Denmark, we'd still call people with disability the handicapped. So we have primarily this, even though we're a welfare state that builds upon like social model of understanding, our way of understanding the disabled identity is very much based on charity or medical model ideas. So just covering up that there are much more ways of understanding disability and showing that to the world through the actions of people with cerebral palsy. In this case, I think that was the important part of it for now. Yeah.
So we're getting a lot of comments and contributions from people with different disabilities, saying that they can identify and it resonates with me. And I have a disability myself, and this one says I'm sensory, I'm deaf. So I have a friend who's deaf and has CP as well. I was supposed to learn how to hear. How can a deaf person learn to hear? So I think what you were speaking about also resonated with many other user groups, just as you said that your work could have been done with other disability groups as well, and it would have I'm sure had another outcome, but a similar kind of the analysis would have been similar. Yeah.
And also I wanted both like to introduce a little bit ways of thinking about disability, but also a way for professionals maybe to engage with disability in not necessarily through poetry, but how can we create ways of gaining knowledge about disability that is actually meaningful and not very disturbing. And I don't necessarily know if I succeeded with like doing emancipatory research is always a big claim to make, but trying to make a community and trying to make people with disability define their own experience of living with disabilities. I think that had some meaning to it, and trying to maybe think about how do my approach objectify or try to subjectify, or how do my approach with working with disability do to the people living with disability. Yeah.
Thank you. So thank you for giving us a lot of food for thought, and I hope every accessibility expert in the room will think about all these things and try to kind of encapsulate it into user research and user practice and all the involvement you have with different stakeholders. This is a little token of our gratitude for you coming all the way to Finland, so that you never forget the Swedish fika.
Thank you.
So thank you for coming, and good luck with the rest of your work.
Thank you.